Welcome, and this is the first episode of Seed Venture, Seed InFocus. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the topic of marriage and divorce, which is really centered around the implementation of cooling off period before divorcing in China. Hello, my name is Joshua, and on the other side is Wang Zhen.
Hello.
And we are host for today, and we are really glad to be with our guests, Xianan and Yifei. Well, Xianan is currently a PhD candidate in gender studies. Well, she is also really known for being part of China, which is a Chinese feminist group based in Britain. So, Xianan, could you possibly tell us a little bit about maybe your role in the group and your background and your experience in this field?
Sure, thanks, Yajin. So my name is Shannon. Hello, everybody. Now I'm doing my PhD in London at SOAS, University of London. I'm part of this group called Vagina. So it's a combination word of vagina, China, so Vagina. And this is a Chinese feminist group based in London or based in UK. I don't have a part in this group. Like, this is a very decentralized group. Everyone is involved in the organization and coordination of the group. But yeah, so we are the only Chinese feminist group in the UK. Yes.
Sounds great. Thank you, Xianan. And Yifei is currently on the exchange in Sciences Po Paris and aims at gender studies. So Yifei, could you tell us a bit more about your relationship to gender studies and maybe your background in a few words?
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you all. So, Alexandra, I'm still an undergraduate, so I'm really a beginner in this field. And I will describe myself as simply a member of the young generation who concerns a lot about gender issues. So for me, it's mainly about gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health, etc. So I developed the passion because I feel that is the right thing to do, because I'm always bothered by the stereotypes, and I believe everyone is. So after realizing there is indeed a subject, I just choose to dig deeper. So I'm volunteering in a non-governmental organization called Social Responsibility Practitioners, the SRP. And we do have a project to help Chinese women living abroad to get out of domestic violence. And so we provide them with legal aid, emotional support, and translation work. And I really think that's cool.
The new law, which is enacted in the Civil Code, stated that couples needs to get in a mandatory period of 30 days before they are eligible for applying for divorce.
The new regulation actually has stirred up a lot of emotions online. A lot of internet users joined the debate and discussed how necessary it is and the implications of the law once it comes into effect. So we did see a lot of different views on this issue. And actually from the governmental side, we see that Wang Jinghua, a director at the Ministry of Civil Affairs Department, said that the cooling off period is designed for couples to avoid making impulsive decisions. So it actually means that it can give them a second chance to rethink their marriage, to think whether they actually want to do this, whether they have properly arranged their matters afterwards, especially concerning their children or other family members. So what do you think of this measure in general? Or how do you feel about the government interpretation of this law? Right.
In general, I'd say perhaps I wasn't very thoughtful, but I just feel confused. I don't really buy the explanation, So till now, I just don't understand the point to take this step. Yeah.
Some people online said that actually this is a response to the rising divorce rate. Nowadays, not only in China, in many countries, we see less marriages, or people choose to get married later in their life, and there are rising divorce rates. So could this legislation be interpreted as a response to the rising divorce rate, or what is your explanation?
So yes, in fact, for me, according as far as I know, according to the Ministry of the Civil Affairs, this legislation is exactly aiming at reducing the total amount of divorcing cases by avoiding those quotation mark impulsive divorce. And yes, the rising divorce rate is indeed a fact, but I still have my reservation about both this intention and the causality between the cooling down period and the divorce rate. Yeah. I can explain later, but maybe Shannon first. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ife. Thanks. I definitely feel quite related to what Ife said, and I agree with her. First of all, I'm not sure all these decisions to divorce are impulsive to start with. I think they're fairly rational, to be honest, and there are a lot of reasoning, there are a lot of decisions to make behind this decision to divorce. You know, I don't think, and I don't know if this is like impulsive decision. And second of all, when people say, well, we want to give you a second chance to rethink about this decision, I don't know if people want a second chance. I think people, this is like seriously and honestly, I think this is the last chance they just want to get rid of this marriage institution. And I don't even know, to be fair, if they get out of this marriage, would this young people would consider to remarry again, to be honest. So I think that this is not only about divorce. I think this is a crisis of marriage in the young generation in China, to be fair.
Indeed, we see a lot of different trends going on, not just in China, but in France. Yeah, there's a going trend. There's a divergence in terms of the people dealing with marriage and stuff, especially in the older generation and younger. About this issue is really about the government imposing some kind of rules, laws, or whatever, that are based more on intentions rather than facts.
I just want to make supplementary point. This I totally agree with Shannon said, because how could you know if people are impulsive or not? You don't have any objective criteria, right? And yeah, how could you know it's not because the financing difficulties, because of the pressure of surviving in the labor market, or because of anything else? So, and as you mentioned, it's a global phenomenon now. So people are getting divorced, and people may be getting remarried. I don't know. So it sounds to me more likely to be a structural problem rather than individual acts. So for at this point, I don't think we should throw the responsibility to individuals and blame them for being irrational. We need to think about this phenomenon and try to figure out what is the structural problem behind it. And yeah, that's more relative to the solution, I guess. And also one point, so when you're telling people to have the second thought, it just sounds to me like a value guidance. It is telling you that this is not a good choice and you need to be serious and you need to be really careful about this. And that's not, I'm not really agree with this kind of value, because at least I think divorce is like an individual right, in your individual freedom. And also you cannot just set up a model of what family should be. It's not just about parents and the children stay together. The family is about love, supporting to each other. And if you don't have them, you don't need to be together pretending you're still a family. So I really don't think that's a good guidance of value, just to pretend we're still together and we should not get apart. Yeah.
I want to contribute here just a little bit. First of all, I do agree and I disagree with the statement that Ife just made, that the increasing rate of divorce is a global phenomenon. In a sense, I agree, because I'm observing it happening in China, happening in this part of the world, which is Europe, happening in the United States, and happening in my field, which is in Rwanda and many other African countries. But also I don't also completely agree, because there's a class perspective in it. You see lower class women in many societies across the world don't necessarily have the privilege to divorce to start with, and then they probably don't even have the privilege to get married, because getting married relies a lot on your social capital, your family background, on your own job positions in the society, your own financial stability. So if a lower class woman doesn't have those as a capital to get married, because at the end of the day, marriage is about calculation of capitals, right, between the two people or the two families. So if it's a lower class woman, so I'd say a lot of lower class women around the world facing this challenge about not being able to get married, because marriage for them could be, I'm saying could be a protection for their welfare, for their, because in many countries, you have to be married to find a job. You have to be married to be trusted as an adult, because that is the symbol of being an adult, right? Before that, you're still a young girl. And after marriage, you're a woman. And a lot of times when you want to get a specific job in many countries, you have to be married to be trusted that you're eligible for that job, right? And so I think this is a global phenomenon, but there is definitely a class perspective or class disparity among different classes of women or different classes of people, including men, for divorce or even getting married. And I think for the civil partnership, this is largely a phenomenon in the global north, or we say in the developed world, because essentially I feel it's because this part of the world doesn't have the pressure to further industrialize itself. So when a country is fully industrialized, it doesn't have the pressure to develop economically and financially and in many other aspects. So nuclear family is not necessarily the foundation of the economic development anymore. In this case, the government, of course, doesn't care too much if you get married or you don't get married. You can live with 2 people, 3 people, polygamy, or whatever kind of relationships you want to choose. Doesn't really matter to its economic development. But for a lot of developing countries, we see marriage is still a very important, is almost the backbone for a country's economic development. So I see, so this civil partnership is really quite limited to countries that are fully industrialized, or we call them first world country or developed country. I'll stop there. Sorry for speaking too much.
All right.
Okay.
It's really great. Like, so you're saying to me, it's there is a regional context, there's a class context behind all these phenomena that you're seeing. Domestic partnership, there is a limitation to it, to where it's being set. Well, maybe Ife, you have anything to add, or we'll move on?
I think it's quite great what Shannon said. I really didn't realize about the economic factors. So I just want to act maybe an example. So in France, we have like this kind of contracts like called PACS. So the PACS is 2 people living together, and is part of the duty and the profit from the marriage. So there might be different inheriting properties, but still they have the duty to take care of each other, and they share the tax just a little bit less than the marriage tax. And well, why they are raising this? I think the reason they are raising this is because they're also considering about the same-sex marriage and other, not very typical type of marriage. So yeah, so I would say, as like in France, for example, is a country that has a very strong Catholic tradition, and so might they won't like really agree to same-sex marriage or something. So just step by step, and they're trying to make this and to provide people more choice. But I totally agree with Shannon that this depends on the level of development of the country. So yeah, in China, I don't even know if we could practice this in China, but I mean, yeah, it could be an alternative, but yeah, step by step, and we'll see. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
All right.
it's always going to be a process thing. All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So Xiang has just said that the marriage is quite close actually to the development level of the society or the country. And you mentioned that so the alternative to marriage like domestic partnership is quite limited to developed countries because they have, they don't have to worry the material stuff, right? But you said that in those underdeveloped countries, marriage is a backbone of the society. But you also mentioned that it is very hard for them to get married because they don't have the capital to get married, like your field experience country, the Rwanda. So how do they handle this kind of situation? What did the local government do, and how those women to protect their rights in that case?
That's a great question. Thanks, Wanjun. First of all, the government in Rwanda, I can definitely only speak on behalf of that, which is my research. So in Rwanda, the government would be very encouraging for people to get married because first of all, this is how they can control the population, right? They can control and govern the population. Second of all, people who are in a marriage relationship are more protected, as in when it comes to inheritance issues, when it comes to children custody issues. When you are in a marriage relationship, you are under the protection of law, right? When you're outside the marriage institution, you're not protected at all. It's just a random relationship that you share with another person. People are quite struggling because this is far from enough. Just hearing the government's encouragement, because what they really lack or what they really don't have is the material conditions or the material capital to really get married. A lot of times you will see in Rwanda, people prefer to get a ceremonial marriage, which is having a party with all your relatives. That's what we Chinese do too, like a banquet, a 喜宴, right? That's more important for them because this is like in a society like in Rwanda where everyone knows everyone, like in China, it's very much a 熟人社会, right? It's like very closely networked. It's very important to announce to your relatives and your relatives' relatives and relatives' relatives that you are married. You now have a family, right? Comparatively, marriage registration at the local council is less important because it doesn't really do anything. A lot of people are not educated to the level where they know marriage is an institution and it has benefits of legal protection. As such, a lot of uneducated people, as in the lower class women, as I was just saying, they would just comply with this social norm that marriage equals having a party. But when they don't have the money to have the party, they can't get married because registration at the local council doesn't really cross their mind. So in this way, they're pretty struggling because they don't have the money to necessarily have the party, and registration at the local council doesn't really make much sense to these lower class women. Yeah. But I do want to add to just one small thing to the PACS, what Yifei was saying. In terms of homosexuality, because it's also not like a massive phenomenon in Africa or on the continent, but you do see people having secret relationships when they are homosexual. And in a way that I would really want to point it out, that coming out of the closet is not a thing in many developing countries. They could just, a lot of these gay people, lesbian or intersexual people would just maintain a secret relationship with their partners, with their lovers, or with the people that they want to stay with, not necessarily coming out with the identity or with the identity label on them saying that I am gay or I am lesbian, which is the phenomenon in this part of the world. That's very, very important, right?
Would you say that they would also be willing to actually push out a institutional change to make them legally recognized, just like legalization of gay marriage in many parts of the world, in Canada, Taiwan, Canada, and so on?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first step for homosexuality in on the African continent would be first legalize homosexuality, because in many countries, like for example in Uganda, if you're gay, you'll be stoned, you'll be killed, you'll be sent to prison. As simple as that, let alone getting married. So I guess the priority or the most urgent issue for many African countries would be decriminalization rather than legalization.
Just like we facing any governmental sanctions, it's always really safe to really decriminalize something before just making room for recognition, right? Yeah, just it's really great ideas gathering right now from Xiaonan and from Yifei. Especially I heard about PACS is really it's also a really great point here in France. Really, it was in the beginning I thought it was a way to actually free those homosexuality here within this land, to bring more freedom to especially younger generation. But right now it kind of transformed into something that's different, probably more grand narrative thing. But if we look back to China in this perspective, would you say that the situation currently and the cooling off period being imposed on these couples will actually better protect their rights as individuals and as one another in a relationship? Would that be a good thing? Would that be beneficial to them, as for the fact that they can proceed, and that can actually trigger probably an institutional change in the executive branch of the government to maintain their guard on domestic violence, and probably to trigger some changes in the way that we deal with that, especially right now. Probably you've experienced that, or you heard of things like that, that the police in China would pretty much being hesitant to deal with situations with conflicts and violence within marriage, as they would probably consider that as some of their business, not their business, not the business of the public, but the business of the family. Do you have anything to add to that, or any response to it?
What I feel now is that there might be some conditions for me to accept this cooling off period decision. One of the conditions that I would now I'm thinking is that to build more and more shelters for domestic violence survivors or domestic violence victims when they really need somewhere else to live other than their own natal home with their husband or with their parents, because when a woman or when any domestic violence victim wants to choose to divorce or just to leave their partner, they do need a separate space, a safe space to live for that 1 month or 3 months, how long you decide for that cooling off period. But that person or those people do need a safe space to live. As long as that is guaranteed, I think it's more acceptable for me to think or to accept the cooling off period, because domestic violence might be, we don't have the statistic now, but I think domestic violence definitely would be one of the major reasons for a lot of people to choose to leave their partner, to leave that marriage.
Yeah, so I agree that the victim of domestic violence should have somewhere to stay, so for the shelter. But I just want to make it more clear that, I really think we need to divide the situation of divorce. So divorce by agreement and the divorce by court decision. So in fact, yeah, people are thinking that the cooling down period might provide protection for the victims, but the fact is the cooling down period here only apply for the divorce by agreement. That means you have already get the agreement on this decision of divorce, and you have assigned all the document of how to divide, how to deal with your property, and you go to the application. And during this period, it's just like it's not really a forced period that to separate the couples. So what we will suggest the victim to do is to go to the court rather than do this. On the one hand, it's hardly for them to get really agreement if there exists the situation of domestic violence. Of course, to get agreement to divorce is not really possible. And on the other hand, when you go to the court and when the court first accept your case, the first instant court, they would accept your, if you have enough evidence, they would just accept your case. And after that, they will have like a period for the court to taking evidence and to try to figure out your case. And during this period, you can get protection. You can apply for, apply for a SUMI or apply for the protection. But that is like, so you go through the judicial way, and that could protect you from your partner, And this period, in fact, usually take you months, like 6 to 9 months. I don't really remember, but so usually when you go to the court, you can get your decision after the second instant court to give you the final decision. And at that period, it's already like a cooling down period and like a protection. So that will be good for the victims. But for this agreement, I don't really think that it's related to those protection of the victim, And in fact, that's not protection, is that even if you, so say you are a victim and you finally get through to the situation and you choose and you achieve to have the agreement on divorce with your partner, but you're asking to wait 1 month more. And during this period, your partner could be regret. And that's the point. So if you are not going to the court and this, during this 1 month period, if your partner regret to get divorced, regret to let you go, and you just cannot go. And that's really the damage, where the damage is. Yeah.
I think what is really important now, what is really at stake now, is to deconstruct the myth of nuclear family, right? So first of all, we might ask ourselves, we must our friends and parents and people around us, why a nuclear family is so important. Since when it has become important to Chinese society. Sorry, it's just the blinds of my window. And as far as I remember, I grew up on the street, and in a way that my mom was always working, my dad was always working. I was raised up by all my neighbors on the street. I was raised up by my grandpa. I was raised up by my grandma, and it's a collective child rearing process. I never thought that I spent not like kids now. You spend the whole weekend hiking with your parents, going to drawing classes with your parents, like family therapy, right? All this fancy stuff you could do now in the 21st century, especially for very elite families. So I think that's not necessarily if the parents divorce and the child, or in the Chinese case, because one child policy and now 2 children policy, the children would left alone without the love from their parents, because love is not necessarily from the parents. Love is from everyone around you, from your friends, from your neighbors. And I think it's important to really to rethink about the myth we put in nuclear family, right? And how to get out of it, how to get love from various channels, from various resources. That was not that far, because now I'm 30-year-old. I was grown. So 30 years or 20 years ago, we didn't live like this. Nuclear family was not as important as it is now. And but definitely when a couple had some sort of domestic violence at home before they got married, before they got divorced, the child is definitely, or the children are definitely traumatized to different extent, right? And I think that's the important thing, that child, we probably want to support them with social therapy, with free social therapy to start with, for those children who experience domestic violence by themselves or by observing their parents having domestic violence against each other. And I think that's the important thing to think about, rather than pressuring the parents to think about their responsibilities. What have I done for my poor kid? But it's actually a lack of social support for them. And children need all sorts of support to grow up, not necessarily from the two people in their lives. And I think that that's the important question for me here.
I think that's quite alarming, and just quite important. I think just to as today, as to what we're seeing here, it's just really how we see nuclear family, and how we see social support, and how we kind of, some people would just sew it back and just, you know, sew it under the cover of domestic violence, under the cover of sort of stability and stuff, and really just kind of we do it, we would go deeper in it, and this is exactly why we are here in this discussion. And Yifei, would you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I totally agree. Just you know, when you are emphasizing the importance of nuclear family, you are actually setting the only symbol of the only right symbol of what a family should be, and that's in fact not a protection. It sounds to me more than rather stigmatization, you know, to all the other types of families, like the one parent family, like Shanna mentioned, the children grew up with their grandparents, and that's not a good thing. So, you know, the trick here is what's the best interest of the child. The trick is you are asking the child and their parents to, you're presuming that staying together is the only best. And in fact, it's not. They're already fighting, or they're already don't talking to each other anymore, and you're still asking to pretend to be happy together, and that's not quite reasonable. Yeah, that's it.
It's not the problem that the children traumatized or something like that. So the real issue that we want to address here is to protect, to make sure that the minors and the vulnerable part of this relationship get protected. So actually it needs support from many aspects from the society. So what do you think, what can we do to improve the situation here? How can we guarantee that, you know, except from the legislative power, what else can we do to make sure that they get protected? Okay, right. So do you have anything to say?
What I mentioned is we could establish some very affordable social therapy for children who have divorced parents, and they might get quite traumatized. Actually, I want to correct myself. They might get traumatized from those domestic violence they observed or they experienced, but also from the divorce their parents have because of the social stigma on divorce, as Yifei was just pointing out. I really appreciate that. So for these children, if they live with one parent, like a single parent, or they live with their grandparents, what do we do with them? I mean, I believe the Shama Tour, the film, was a huge shock in 2020 in China, right? Everyone who has watched this was like pretty shocked by the fact that this Shama Tour people, smart people, they actually those 留守儿童, those children who are left in the villages who live with their grandparents only because their parents had to work in Guangzhou or in other like southern cities in China. So there is a link between this now this low-paid workers in southern China and their childhood, and which is pretty traumatized because they didn't get enough social support, no parent support, no family support, right? So I think it's important to get social therapy support for them, or even to get job support for them for these children. And beyond that, I think for domestic violence victims, we need to establish more shelters for them, more affordable ones, even for free, and without less conditions. Because I know in Shanghai there are shelters for domestic violence victims, but they're really limited. They're really limited, and you can't stay there forever, for sure. And I don't think it's spreading out to all domestic violence. I mean, then again, we're talking about Shanghai, you know, the wealthiest city in China, right? So we can't even imagine what is happening in second tier cities or even in the rural parts of China. I think more shelters for them as an alternative in this cooling off period for domestic violence victims would be very, very crucial.
Yeah, I think as you said, there's a divide in rural part of China and in bigger cities and in Shanghai and probably most developed cities, not just in their views towards the resources they get, but also in the fact that they have different views, they have different constructions of this picture at all, like of marriage and divorce. And so here I'm gonna ask a really interesting question, the question that a lot of people that we want to ask the most. Well, to be honest, it's a pretty interesting question because it was really further in a lot of online discussions, and you see it everywhere when people started to really think, to really have this kind of suggestion that instead of a cooling down period when a couple decide to break up, the lawmakers should make it harder for people to get in a marriage. For example, setting a period of cooling off period before they were able to marry, or before marriage certificate is being awarded to them, so that they can calm down in the beginning, so as to avoid later, later chaos or whatever. What's your view on this thing? This is a pretty creative thing, but yeah, I'm really excited to your response to it.
This is quite interesting because, actually for me, okay, let's take a step back, okay? So I actually highly doubt the justification for both the two cooling down period. We're talking about justification now. So it's like if you're asking people to postpone the date of getting married or divorced after they already decided. So this is kind of deprivation of their choice, right? Their free will. So, and obviously when you are making policies to deprive people of some rights, you need to be justifiable. So it could be providing facts and statistics telling that this decision is certainly profitable, at least for some, or you just like demonstrate it's necessary, and without this cooling down period, some serious consequence could happen. But for now, it's just nothing. They're just presuming maybe you're not, you're not calm. But that's not really an excuse, right? So if you don't have this like kind of justification, then you cannot just take away my right away from me. Since I'm, the people who getting married and getting divorced, since they are adults and they can and they should be responsible for their own choice, right? So why are you deciding for them whether they are calm or not? So why are you deciding when can they finally get into the marriage or get divorced? So this just doesn't make sense, And when you are telling this to people, it's just like you're not trust their judgment, and you really want to fit everyone in the only correct model of your imagination, of the imagination of the policymaker or someone else, I don't know. But so the marriage is very divine, and we need to, you once you get into the marriage, you better not get out. And that's not really true for the modern society, right? And well, yeah, there are a consideration of class and other things, but so from my perspective, it's just not that persuadable. So yeah, I'm still emphasizing that we cannot just telling the divorce is not good and try to deify the marriage. In fact, so it does mean just like deify the marriage. And I'd rather think you need to instead of setting the cooling down period for getting into marriage, it's better to tell people that getting marriage is your free choice and you have the right, yeah, of course. And also getting divorced is not a bad thing, not unacceptable, if you have made a decision clearly, and if you think about it and you trust yourself, just get divorced. And even you regret, you can just get back into this marriage. It's possible. So why not? Yeah, that's just my thought. Thanks.
Thank you. It reminds me of the social contrast. What is it? The political institution classes. All those concepts. Not it's pretty ideal. I guess. Well. Let's hear what Xianan has to say.
Thanks. This is indeed a very interesting question, and I was also thinking about social contract. I was also thinking, if marriage is a social contract, if we all agree to that, then that contract is actually the norm in the society. So getting married is a normal thing to do in the society, any given society around the world, be it France or China or any parts of the world. But getting divorced is not normal. It's less normal than getting married. So in this way, we would say, this is not me saying, this is actually Xiao Meili, the Chinese feminist activist, saying in her own podcast, well, she said why she chose to be a person who doesn't want to get married, 不婚主义者. It's because she thinks getting married is a compliance. It's a compliance with social norms, right? Because you're expected to get married at a certain age even, right? You can't get married when you're 18. You can't get married when you're 50. You have to get married at 25. That's even that precise, right? But then getting divorced or getting not married is a choice. It's a personal choice. So you will see that getting married and getting divorced or not even getting into this marriage contract they're quite different. You can't say, so coming back to one Joshua's question, that if we put a cooling off period before getting married, that won't work because that's a norm. A lot of people would just comply with the norm because your parents will just phone you every day asking you when you're getting married. That's most of the people why they're getting married, right? It doesn't take a lot of rationality to make that decision. A lot of people get married because of pressure from work, pressure from family, pressure from yourself, pressure from the society. So you don't actually make that decision by yourself. Other people make that decision for you, right? It doesn't really matter you put 30 days cooling off or like 300 days cooling off period, because eventually a lot of people would just have to make that decision. This is very, very different from the decision to get divorced or the decision to not get married in the first place, because that is a hard choice. And that choice is a real choice. That choice is a real decision that you have to reason, you have to think the pros and cons. So simply, I think the cooling off period before getting married just won't work, because it's just not the same thing as we are talking about getting divorced or not getting married.
Okay, so wow, that's quite true. As you just said that, so because of their different social conditions, even they have the same rights, they can't enjoy the same rights. So back to the domestic violence case, it comes to me that in some third tier cities or in the countryside, a lot of women are vulnerable parties. So when they reach out for help, actually we still need third parties to get involved to help them. But Sana, you said before that speaking of the executive power, that there are already a lot of small social groups to help women to get out of the broken marriage, but most of them are in the big cities like Shanghai, right? So in small countryside or in small cities, what can we do to improve that situation? In China, that the sense of community are quite important and plays an important part in people's daily life. So I wonder, could the local community do something for those women?
I'm so ashamed that I'm not an expert on this. I'm not even a researcher on this, even though I do recognize the significance of the problem, as Wang Zhen pointed out. I don't know at this very specific moment. what comes to mind would be, do they have accessible institutions or groups to go to? Do they have to come to the big city to ask for help, or to, if they experience domestic violence, if they need hospitals to testify that they actually experienced domestic violence, can they do those testification of their like bruises on their body in the local hospitals? That's my first question to start with. If they can't, and then they definitely have to travel to the town, the 县医院, the town hospitals or whatever. That needs money, that needs transportation, that needs time, which they probably cannot afford, neither of them. Then I definitely do more research about that. Thanks so much, Wangjin. That's a brilliant question.
We are talking about, if you're talking about domestic violence, we really encourage the third party to take part in that. So like the friends, the relatives, if they're like repeatedly being reported by the victim that she has been through the violence, their testification also could be like a proof in front of the court. So it counts. But the problem is just people are not really realizing about this. So the third party, the friends, the third party, the I don't know, the straight bureau, they're not realizing they could play a part in this. So what important is that I think if possible, we need to try to educate or to spread this idea that like domestic violence is really important, it's a crime, and you need to take it seriously, and the third party do counts, third party's opinion do counts. So that's very important. And I just like to mention that in fact domestic violence, the victim of domestic violence is really a small part in the whole group of divorcing cases. So while we're considering the divorcing case, it's the effective of any policy on the divorcing is really not just about the victims. It's also about other people, other who are divorcing peacefully and just want to, start a new life. And yeah, so what about them? Why wait for another month, or why not wait for another month? That's a point we need to discuss. Yeah, that's it.
Can I add one more thing, Wangjin, just to your question, very, very quickly? Just one thing also came to my mind, which is a very brilliant and impressive practice in Rwanda that I observed when I was there. So they had an institution called One Stop Center. So this is a center encompassing police system, hospital system, and a legal support system. So it's a mixture of three things. When a victim of domestic violence, or I would call them survivor of domestic violence, goes to a one-stop center, they can do all these three things in a set, in one institution. That's very, very important, because I was also talking about the cost to go to the police office, the hospital, and then the court, right? A lot of people, a lot of women especially, probably cannot afford to do all of these things as a procedure to finally get the case down. So I think a one-stop center is quite important to cater for women who have limited resources, and they can have a go-to, and it's very easily accessible. That's from me.
That's quite cool, really.
Yeah, this is our starting point. Definitely, has really kind of inspired a lot of thoughts, just not among us, and we will definitely kind of push it forward, maybe to discover what is problem at, and to really kind of just to see more discussions about the topic. And really we appreciate all your support, all your effort today, and all your presence.
Thank you so much for organizing this. It has been brilliant.
All right,
thank you for having me here.